what's up with this team, what makes this team a team.
Hey, I'm Nick.
And I'm Graeme.
And this is the Dude, Where's My Code podcast.
New year, and we're back with a new season? I don't know.
I guess what we call it, yeah.
Season. But in the time that we've been away, lots of things have changed, both for us, both personally and on work fronts as well.
Yeah, it's been quite some time. It was good to be able to catch up again. And today we were chatting through resourcing on teams, how that can look when you're stretched pretty thin, and sort of the impacts that can have on the team as well. So,
yeah, it's possible when teams are busy or juggling lots of priorities or being pulled in different directions to lose kind of the team mission or the team charter or the sense of team togetherness. And we talked about maybe what you can do about that if it's inevitable, or how to maybe avoid it in the first place.
Yeah, we think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So thanks so much for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe and leave us a comment if you want to hear other topics that we can chat through. So thanks for watching. It's cool to finally be like reconnecting in the new year. I don't know when the last time we did an episode is. I think when we were chatting before, I wanted to say that it was like, I don't know, partway through 2023, but I think it was actually closer to like the beginning of the year.
I think it was early because I don't think we did any episodes after Emmy was born, and she is over 9 months. She was born in end of March. Wow. So it could have been like February or March last year.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible to think about. Like I said, I thought that it was not so early in the year. So it's good to kind of get back to doing this. So kind of excited to get talking about different topics. I know from chatting with you on the side, I have a couple of names lined up for people that want to get on the podcast and stuff. And we're kind of excited to be able to engage with us. So that'll be cool. It's always nice to bring in other people as well.
Yeah, we've said this before, but I'm super excited to like kind of take what we learned in the first season or whatever you want to call it and kind of like revamp and apply and learn.
Yeah, for sure. And it's everything's a learning process, right? Like everything that we talk about when we get on these calls together, it's like we're sharing our learnings, and we're certainly not experts at everything, right? But it's always a work in progress for learning, including things like trying to put together a podcast and stuff like that. So
yeah, it's kind of neat to like have experiences and to talk about them, and then also to like maybe touch on the things that we've learned through the experiences, not just like self-learning, but also I know sometimes when I have a problem at work, I don't have a lot of people at work that I can go to. And so I'll go talk to other people, or I'll go read like available resources about things, and then kind of try and like learn and apply that. And then we come and kind of talk about it here. And so it's really great to chat about it, to share what we have learned, and also like see what other insights are about the situation. So
for sure. Yeah. And I mean, something like we're talking about like exciting life changes and stuff. So yes, you moved, new child, and also job change as well, right? Since, we were kind of putting some content together. So you're still at a small company, but your setup is a little bit different where you're currently located. Is that fair to say?
That's right. Actually, it was my 1 year anniversary, I guess, at the organization today. So that Very was cool. a pretty wild reminder that it's been a year. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of changes have taken place there, since I joined, and since understanding the team and the team's needs and the org's needs and what we needed to do about that. So,
right. And technically you have a directorship title now at this company as well, right?
That's right. I got to be careful how I talk about that, but I guess like my position is when you're a director with an engineering team of 7, like,
sure,
titles do talk about your responsibilities and expectations. And no matter what the size of the team is, like there are more responsibilities with being leadership at that level. But at the same time, I was a senior engineering manager managing more ICs than I do now as a director. So it's like, but yeah, the learning in this role for me has been a lot more about strategic application, coming into like leadership meetings and having to talk about engineering strategy and do a lot more planning. And it's a lot different. It's not just leading leaders and uh, it's just so much more
Yeah.
in terms of setting goals and planning and tracking and reporting and changing the audience that you have to speak to and advocating for things at a leadership level. It's a different experience for sure.
It's kind of cool to think about. I was writing some content about this recently, about going from even like an IC to an engineering manager, right? Like it's not like it, sure, in many cases it's a promotion because it comes with a pay increase and more responsibility, but like it's a different role. It is fundamentally just different to go from being like in your case, from like having a testing background or a software engineer, any type of developer, individual contributor, to managing people. Like it's people. And I find it interesting that maybe not as and I can't speak to this, but maybe not as dramatic as a departure going to like directorship role, but like still there's going to be other things where you're like, I have these other skills, these muscles and these skills that I have to flex now to figure out like how to do this properly.
I did see that, and I think it's so funny because it's talked about frequently and yet still seems so misunderstood about like promoting from IC into to management. And I just think it bears repeating. Like I am super glad that more organizations are embracing separate career ladders for like you
Yeah.
can continue to grow as an IC, and there's such a thing as a very strong contributing IC who like just keeps focused on the individual technical contributions and making the technical team around them better, but without doing that people leadership.
Right.
And then letting people who get into leadership own more of the kind of strategy direction of the team's processes and practices, and then also helping the other individuals on the team with their career progression and their growth and their I guess application of their skills to their daily tasks, right?
Just it feels like a better fit naturally, right? Otherwise it almost feels like artificial to take people who maybe don't even have interest in a lot of like the career and more dedicated people side of things and being like, hey, well, you got to do it now, and then they don't. But I'm kind of curious, like, so your current setup, it's, you know, you mentioned smaller team, like what's the composition of your team look like? How are you kind of spread doing different tasks? And we don't have to get into like the the nitty gritty details of you're not going to reveal all the secrets of the projects and stuff you're working on, but maybe walk through like how people are set up and all that.
Right. Yeah, it's in evolution. The team just kind of underwent. I hesitate to use the term reorg because of negative implications, but we kind of redesigned the layout of the team and the responsibilities of the team, and that's kind of just come into application in the last week. But it's been a long time planning. When I joined the team, so again, about 6 engineers and testers, and that's the size we're at as an engineering group. The way we were structured before was across like stacks. And so
Okay.
individual skill sets, you're a back-end engineer or you're a front-end engineer or you're a mobile engineer. But you have to remember that when we talk about a team of 6, like you're a mobile engineer means potentially you're the mobile engineer,
Yeah.
which is like a little bit difficult. And so what happens is we have to own as an engineering team our mobile app, our web app, the backend servers that power both of those things, all the infrastructure that hosts and runs all of that service. And we have to do that while delivering new features in that ecosystem, while maintaining that entire ecosystem. And it's pretty easy to get stretched very thin, and it forces a lot of focus. Like, what do we have to deliver? How do we prioritize these things against each other? And you and I have talked about this before. I'm a really big believer in making sure that when we're doing stuff, we're delivering value,
Right.
and like everything we do, you can kind of draw this like straight line to business value and customer impact. And so what's difficult when you're splitting work across stacks on a team like this is there are times when certain features or certain needs kind of naturally settle in different places. And so you find yourself saying, oh, well, we got to get ahead of, setting up the back end for this new feature. And so the back end engineers are busy, but what are the front end and mobile engineers doing at that time? And even best intentioned, tackling tech debt or tackling other kind of lingering tasks or getting ahead of some other things, a couple things happen. One, you're kind of finding what I call filler work. which is,
Hmm.
hey, this isn't necessarily the most important thing for the org right now, but we have capacity, so we're going to do it. Or you find that, you find that the team starts to feel really disconnected because you're working on so many disparate things because they don't
Right.
align nicely. And there's this ping pong game of like, we built the back end, and no matter how well you plan and you like build your
It's
contracts and
gonna
your
be perfect.
schemas, front end's going to go and implement, and they're going to say we missed something or we need a change, and then back end now has to come back to something that they built before and rebuild. And it really felt like it was difficult to focus and build together as a team. And
That almost sounds like, I know it's not the same thing, but I think about situations where it's like you have developers building things and they go, "Oh, we're done. Give it to the testers while we work on the next thing." It's like
it
it's
is
the
the same
same
thing.
thing.
We, many of us who've at least been in the industry for a while or worked at big companies, have experienced that. Like, hey, we gave something to testing and it came back for whatever reason, but we've already moved on and now we have to recontext switch. And there's this, again, like, what do we do about the stuff that's already in flight? Like, do we create a longer cycle time
Mhm.
to focus on getting the next thing into testing and then coming back? Or do we like put things on pause and come back? And it's, at the end of the day, chaotic at best
That's
of
the
times.
exact word I was thinking of. I was like, that's just chaos. Yeah, it really is.
And you can put processes in place and all that, but I don't know. At the end of the day, it's still many things in flight, right? It's juggling multiple features and deliveries. So that was a thing that I really wanted to address, and it took a long time to really come to terms with what we wanted to do about that and how to do
Mhm.
that. It also certainly requires other stakeholders to be engaged. You can't just change the shape of your engineering org without an impact to product,
Right.
potentially to training and customer service and the people receiving your features. But I think it does mean that if you are optimizing for value delivery, that people will eventually come to experience that they are getting more complete things faster. It's
Right.
not that you're like delivering faster, but you're delivering more like holistic experiences. And so things aren't kind of like coming in little pieces over time. It's like, hey, like we've delivered this entire feature is kind of what I wanted to drive for. And so, well, on the surface, it looks like we're doing less things. And so maybe like the output is reduced. We don't want to measure just the output of the team. We want to aim for improving the outcomes of the team and seeing those right through to value. Um,
That's something that came to mind, and it's I've been wanting to bring this up in different capacities, but there's a lot of talk right now. I do a lot of LinkedIn perusing these days, and I see people talking about like vertical slice software architecture, and they're talking specifically about how the architecture of software is laid out. And part of me is like, okay, we can talk about any type of software architecture, but taking a vertical slice approach to delivering features can be completely separate. You can have any type of software architecture and you still approach delivery of features and value as vertical slices. It's literally exactly what you're saying, trying to get the team rallied behind like we have an end-to-end feature we want to deliver, right? Like if we backtrack in the previous way that you were set up with different people working on different things, like you could have had the software architecture itself structured however. It could have been set up as vertical slices in the software architecture, and you didn't approach delivery of features that way. They're separate things. And I've been finding it really challenging to try and explain that to people that like, yeah, having a vertical slice software architecture could be cool. It might not be the thing that fits well for you, but at the end of the day, trying to approach feature delivery that way, I feel like makes a lot of sense. So just wanted to kind of shove that in there.
I think where the critics might get hung up, and there might it could be some justification for this talk about vertical architectures, is around like domain ownership and responsibility. A
Yeah, yeah.
critical view of, hey, like a team owns end-to-end delivery is like if that end-to-end touches a whole bunch of services, if you're in like a super micro architecture, or like what, or if you're in a giant mono repo with like people who know areas better than us. I mean, it doesn't matter what your setup is, you're going to run into this problem of, well, is everybody expected to understand our entire system and the
Right.
layout of our entire system and the implications of making changes in the entire system. And it is a challenge. We talked about how to address that as we restructured around, end-to-end delivery teams.
Mhm.
And what we landed on for now, and whether or not it's the best solution remains to be seen, but we still want individuals who either like have specific skill sets and expertise or a desire to be involved in specific layers of the tech stack and decisions there to own like the guild model where there are
Right.
sets of people who are responsible for making these strategic decisions and then like disseminating that strategy out to the sub teams that are building. And they're not a team, but they will get together and like strategize together, make decisions together. So if someone is building and they need to stand up a new service and there's questions about the technology we want to use for that or the structure that we want to use for that, instead of just going and doing it and making that decision for the entire engineering team, they might bring that decision to the back end guild and say, okay, we have a decision to make, and this is going to have implications for the long-term decisions, for future back-end decisions, and for stuff we have to maintain as an engineering team. So let's make this decision here in this group. And people can
The,
self-subscribe to those groups, but yeah.
right. That guild model is very interesting, and I'm just thinking about for folks that are listening to this, a way that I like to try and sort of explain in a maybe a more visual way what Graham's saying is like if you have teams of people that are working together on products or product areas, right? You have these clusters of people working in these areas. There's going to be things that seem to overlap, whether they're systems, processes, like types of patterns that we implement. So in Graham's explanation, he was talking about standing up a service, right? The way that I like to think about guilds visually, and there's not like a set number of guilds. You might come up with these other types of groupings, but I like to think about them as like horizontal cross sections. I think about them like a dotted line box that you might draw around different members of different teams, so that you can bring together some expertise cross functionally to really talk about a particular topic, and that way it's not like, oh, only this one team that you can go to ever has knowledge about testing infrastructure. It's like, no, like all of these different product or feature areas should know about testing stuff or pick the domain, whatever it happens to be. And these guild concepts can facilitate that sort of as a cross section across the groups.
Yeah, super helpful. And many people may start to think, oh, wait a second, I've heard about this. Like the Spotify model was this popular thing for a while that everybody talked about, and Spotify, some members of Spotify wrote this like blog about it. And it turned out that the blog was actually rather like aspirational and not necessarily a reflection of the way Spotify worked. And so one of the critiques was like, hold on, they don't actually even do that. And then in reflection, it actually became, and they didn't, and it failed. And there's a lot of follow-up pieces about the Spotify model, and it failed. And so like, buyer beware, like don't blanket apply this at your org. And I think that's like, maybe that's just good advice when you're reading stuff on the internet, is like, don't think that that'll just work for you if you go and slap it on your team. So the same thing is true here. I think we drew elements from the Spotify model, and we drew elements from team topologies with stream-aligned teams. And I think ultimately cobbled together something that probably looks like something that's out there already, but was us really picking and choosing the pieces that worked for us. And the guilds is kind of something, I don't know, I don't think we'll keep that term necessarily, but that is what we're talking about, is that like cross-functional slice of individuals across teams that are interested in owning or investing in specific pieces of the infrastructure, the tech stack.
And that's kind of leading me to my next question, because you started to mention it, right? So you have individuals that are probably more experts in particular, technical areas, like say mobile or front end or back end, just to come up with some differences. And in this particular model, they're no longer going to be like, oh, I'm just the mobile person, right? It's kind of like, we're doing this feature, we're rallying together. So maybe the obvious question is like, how do you and how does a team feel about like efficiency there? Like all of a sudden someone who might have felt like, I'm an expert in everything I do because I just work on the mobile stuff, they're like, oh crap, I have to work in the back end, and like I actually don't know how to do that. So you're mentioning like this guild system, like is that, I know you kind of just switched to this model, but is that the sort of the idea that that's going to help facilitate that, or any input so far from the team about how they're feeling cautious or excited maybe?
I'm going to get flamed for the use of full stack because there's a
Okay.
lot of critique of like that as a title and an expectation on engineers. But I think of it as people should be empowered to specialize and like care about
Mhm.
specific things over others. But I think it makes a well-rounded developer to be able to jump in and help one way or another. And so I think about this in a few ways. It's like the guilds are there to make sure that people who have expertise and interest in an area can help dictate the direction that the technology goes. But teams, when they're implementing features, are expected to be able to do that. And not every new feature, initiative, theme, whatever they're working on is always going to cross every stack. It usually will, but there's times when we don't need to do anything on mobile to support this, or maybe we don't need to do anything on web to support this, or maybe this is purely a backend change.
Sure.
And so with that, it what I've explained to the team members is that it's okay not to be an expert in everything, but can it really hurt to like learn and grow and understand and be involved in? And so it's kind of up to the team leads how they want to distribute work. You can choose to really invest in like doubling down in people's individual skill sets and always assigning mobile tasks to the person who has the mobile skill, always assigning front end tasks to people who have more front end experience. But I'm not sure that's the best way to do it. It's not wrong, but I just want to make sure everyone on the team knows that being an effective engineer who's delivering to expectations is not always owning tickets and writing code and delivering top-notch code. And you can be slower and learning, and we can accept as an org that you might not be the fastest person to do this task, but there's also built-in learning and career growth, which we're willing to invest in. You can also say there might be times when you're not delivering effectively by writing code, but by participating in pairing with other engineers, just to be a second set of eyes, even if it's not an area of expertise. I used to steal a term from another manager I worked with, but you can offer ignorance as a service and show up as someone who doesn't know why someone's making decisions that they are and ask those questions. You can participate in pull request code reviews. You could actively contribute to writing unit tests or other types of testing. You can invest in some of the infrastructure needed to support the changes being made. There's just so many ways to do it that isn't, hey, I'm going to take a backend task because I'm familiar with the backend code.
It's kind of interesting. It's like this. I always like to think about engineers as great problem solvers, right? So when you impose a different set of constraints, which is like you can't just work on your most favorite thing all the time, kind of goes back to you didn't say busy work, but you had like another term for like this work that isn't the utmost priority across the org. It's just the work that can get done, right? So instead of just doing that, you impose this other restriction. And I mean, people, depending on some processes you're familiar with, you could talk about like WIP limits, like your work in progress limits. But regardless of whether or not you enforce that, just the concept of like delivering in vertical slices imposes another constraint, which is like, we're not all just going to do different things. We're going to work on this thing. And when you start to do that, it's like this, you can have an interesting creative process, which is like, how can I contribute to this? And not just, what's the thing I'm good at, right? It's just a different way to kind of look at it.
One of my big critiques of Scrum has always been it doesn't work super nicely with like iterative development and deployment and modern CI/CD practices, because what you're saying is here's a chunk of work, get it done in your sprint window, whether that's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. And so you can only ever expect that something will be delivered by the end of the sprint because that's what was committed to. And we've often on my teams looked at even the backlog within a sprint as stack ranked prioritized. And I would rather someone help see the top tasks across the finish line first than have them pick up a new task off the to-do pile. Even though we know we've committed to doing it in a 2-week window, I would still rather see things complete sooner in the sprint, get through testing, and potentially be deployable before the end of the sprint than to have a whole bunch of things in flight. And so this kind of is the same thing. It's, hey team, here's a host of stuff we want done. And you
Mm-hmm.
might look and go, oh, I'm familiar with working on item number 6 in the list, and we're a team of 3. And I'll just do that because, you know, we're working towards the end of the sprint. I would so much rather you participate in picking up a task that might take you a little longer and you don't know it, or pairing with someone to get something else across the finish line first.
Yeah, it's not
And I think,
necessarily about jumping in to take something that's a high priority to block people because you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm just going to slow it down. But like, look at what's high priority and find a way that you can be involved and participate and help move things along, right?
right. I think you asked about the team's reaction to this. Obviously, we're pretty new to it, so
Right.
it remains to be seen. But it's something that I think is really important if you're going to drive for an environment like this, is that there's a lot of trust and safety and understanding so that nobody has to worry, oh, I'm being measured against my ability to deliver, but I'm being asked to be able to deliver like in more things and more places. Like that would be a pretty absurd ask. So
Right.
I genuinely mean it when I go to the team and say, please help with the most important things first. I'd rather see less things in flight but getting completed than more things in flight. And that's how you will be measured, is your effectiveness as a team to deliver value quickly, or efficiently, I guess is the right way to put it. And the team can trust that when I say that, I mean it, and that there's room to be slower to delivery because there's learning built in, or you know, to be not the name that's attached to all the commits and PRs that have opened in
Right.
the last week because you've been kind of secondary to the work. And I I hope it seems to have been received well, and I think, you know, I would like that to be a testament to kind of the trust that we've built as a team over the last year, that we can try this experiment and that it's not going to be hung, you know, an individual hung to the fire if it doesn't work. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, that's cool. That'll be an exciting transition. So I'm excited to hear like more about now that you've kind of launched this with the team, like how that evolves over time and what the feedback is, right? Like what learning comes from that because I mean, right now it's kind of conceptual. Like I think it all makes sense what you're saying. I think personally that's a great way to organize things. So it'll just be neat to see in practice how that pans out.
we wrote a bunch of documents and convinced a bunch of people, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's actually going to work out well. So
Right.
definitely more to come on that one.
It's just
I think
Spotify, right? So
as we, you know, yeah, as we talk about this, I guess it's got me wondering. I know we've had past conversations about our teams don't necessarily look the same or work the same, but I do know, given that I've spent the last year trying to address the team having competing priorities and kind of feeling chaotic all the time, I had heard from you that you had a similar situation in that your team was potentially being pulled in different directions, maybe not even as a team but as like subsets of the team, and kind of
yeah.
like being forced to address multiple priorities. And I was kind of curious to hear how that's going, since I think it's somewhat reflective of the same problem but kind of with a different face on it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's probably a good way to frame it, right? So for context, there's two teams I manage. One of them, it's been a little while now. I inherited second to this first team that I had, and the first team, for context, the rate at which features and changes get rolled out is a lot slower than what I'm used to historically. And I don't mean because like the team is not capable of delivering changes. I just mean like we enforce safe deployment practices. As we're deploying things out to worldwide, these changes for all of the Microsoft 365 services. So there is built-in safety, which happens to be built around timing and how much bake time and certain things like that. So what happens for even individuals on the team is like they're like, I'm done the thing. I need to roll it out like through flighting and make sure that things are okay. And the side effect of that is that we get people that are like, well, I'm not just going to wait until it's all the way and just do nothing. Like I'm going to do the next thing. So I'm very used to, like, Graeme, how you're describing trying to approach vertical slices of things. But if I did that with my team, like you couldn't wait, you can't wait until the thing has landed all of the way. It's just not realistic.
You'd have a whole lot of downtime.
Yeah, and so people might say, okay,
I
well,
mean,
why don't you
individual downtime, not service downtime, I think is.
none of that. We don't have any. Um, but you might have people saying, well, why don't you shrink, the amount of bake time and stuff like that? It's sure, like it's not really just like a decision I make. That's like an entire organization that has to rally behind like how comfortable we are. So, and that goes up many levels beyond me. I could have influence to that, but it's not just me. So we get people individually within the team that are kind of just working on different areas. It's just kind of how that works because there's so much in flight. It's not something that I'm personally excited about because it kind of just goes against all the things we were just chatting about. Now, what's tricky is that this second team I have, I don't know what the right word is. I keep saying when I inherited them, I kind of did, right? So their manager had moved on to a different team, and I was able to inherit this team. I don't know if there's a better word for that, but I
They were
inherited this team.
transitioned to you.
This team transitioned to me. Yeah, I'm not going to say like I adopted the team or something. I don't.
Right.
Yeah, but awesome set of people. They're amazing. I don't think they give themselves enough credit, but I think that realistically there was a significantly larger team that existed before, and they also kind of transitioned to this other area. So their responsibilities did not shrink. The team itself was like completely downsized and then transitioned over to me, and they're maintaining everything that they have to do, if not more. So how I approach this, just to give you an example, like our on-call rotation would have meant that two people in North America would be permanently on call, like just the way that the rotations are set up. It's not,
Right.
you can't do that. So I've been trying to find ways to bring people from my first team to assist with all of the work on the secondary team, whether that's on call, feature delivery, that kind of thing. And I guess they're in related spaces, but like the tech stack is completely different. Like it would be completely invalid to say like, oh, it's just the same stuff. Like you can easily apply it. Like concepts, yes, that's probably where it ends though. So the result here is that I have an original team that is starting to feel like pretty disjoint because they're already working in different areas, and now I'm pulling a lot of them to help with the second team. And I would say that maybe that second team, maybe they don't feel as disjoint. I feel like they probably feel pretty cohesive because they've been able to stay together and just continue to focus on what they've been doing. So I'd say that's probably the lay of the land currently.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, like, is there things as a leader of a team in that situation that you do to try and help? I mean, I think when we talk about this, one of the concerns that comes up is, does the team have a sense of being and belonging and mission, or is it just like, oh, we're developers kind of co-located and in this remote
Right.
world, like maybe not even that, right? Like, what is the thing that makes this team the team, and how do you as a leader like contribute to that?
Yeah, that's probably been one of my biggest challenges with this. So I'm going to touch on a couple other parts and then maybe try to answer your question in a long-winded way. But some of the benefits that I see that have like, I'm not saying like I fabricated the benefits, but like some of the benefits I truly see coming out of this are like the tech stacks are different, but having people look at them, it's like, we're starting to say like, should these things converge? Like there's this interesting learning opportunity where we're like, why are we reinventing the wheel over here? Like we've been two teams that coexisted like completely, in isolation, but like we have to do some type of patching system. Like why do we have a different patching system? We have different metrics for how we roll changes out and show saturation. Like why are they different? Like, and sometimes we're like, yeah, it makes sense, these systems are different. So I think having some overlap there is really good. So I can lean into that and say like, hey, look, this is beneficial for deployment overall. Like this is a good thing. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the things that I try to draw upon are benefits to the greater good, if I can call it that way. So that could be, it's good for deployment overall as like a strategy. It could be, hey, deployment priorities. Like I take a zoomed out lens, not to say that people on my team aren't aware of certain things, but They might not care if they're not hyper focused on it, but I try to, get them to zoom out as well and say, hey, look, like these other things on this second team, like if I were to stack rank a bunch of stuff, like this will have a bigger impact and you can be part of that impact. Which
Mm-hmm.
leads me to this next point of like, hey, there's interesting career opportunities where people can. I had one individual on my team who did such an awesome job leading an effort on the first team, and the second team needed that same type of effort, the same technical effort to go into it. I
Yeah.
had him lead the same thing on that second team. And it was truly just like this really awesome opportunity for him to showcase all his abilities. And I think it worked out well. So yeah, I'm just trying to tie things back mostly to like common overall goals, and then for individuals finding them ways to be like inspired about that work. But like, is the team feeling it? Yeah, like I have had individuals say like, do like literally say things along the lines of like, should we just like come up with different team names and stuff now? Like, should we just identify as something different? Because I think that
Mm-hmm.
identity, that core identity of the team is sort of eroding, which is it's challenging. That's like I said, I think that's the hardest part is like, how temporary is this helping hand approach?
Yeah, it sounds like what I'm hearing is you've got plenty of opportunity to take this kind of like need to be spread out or focused on different things, and spinning it as, I don't, not a negative spin, but like being able
Right.
to show individuals the like the opportunity in that and kind of the positive side of exposure to new tech stacks and new opportunities and kind of really widen their bubble of impact. And
Right.
that's,
And it's
I think,
not
on the
fabricated,
individual,
right? Like it is real.
it,
I'm not just like, how do I make something up to tell the team? It's
yeah,
like
it's like enlightening to the perspective of like, oh, I have to be pulled over here versus, oh, I get to go work over here, or I get to exercise this thing.
exactly.
It really is like expanding the opportunity around the individual, that's available to them. But I guess so. It sounds like what you're saying is on an individual level, that's a thing you can pitch or coach people through. But that doesn't change the fact that as a cohesive team or a group of individuals that make up a team, they don't necessarily feel that like connectedness or like what's up with this team, what makes this team a team, I
Yeah,
guess.
for sure. And I do think right now that's like I said, I think that's my biggest challenge with it. And I have been trying for a little while to try and get back to like to steady state, but the unfortunate reality is like this second team is so understaffed that like unless the work they need to do just shrinks, like it remains a gap where they had more team members. So we're spending a lot of time trying to automate things that take people time. Or like if we're a platform team, so having to support partners, making sure we make that experience better, so partners rely less on us for hands-on stuff. But anything we can do to free up, engineer time is things that we're investing into. So
I think one of the things that also makes a good leader is being able to speak competently to like priorities and like the why behind what's being done. I mean, it's generally common knowledge that product managers and product owners, like, a key value for them is being able to advocate and kind of like really like explain the why. But I think as a leader, knowing like the sources of change that are going to come to your team and then
mhm.
being able to like speak competently to them and in a way that's compelling to the team to say like, look, like you can only control what you can control. These changes are coming. Here's why they are happening, whether it's like you're being pulled this way or hey, like the reality is organizational priority dictates that this other work really needs to get done and it's important. And so being able to kind of at least emphasize that. Again, I'm not sure that it's a solution to a sense of team togetherness or oneness, but it certainly helps like reduce the blow of why do I feel like we have to do so many different things, or why do things feel like a little bit, not why do they feel chaotic and not kind of like consistent in the asks of the team, right?
Right. And I'm not sure that I'm going to get my two teams to converge on technology or something in the shorter term where all of a sudden it starts to go back to, hey, look, like we are just working in the same things. Like, I'm not sure that's going to happen. I don't want to say like in time, as it suggests like something catastrophic is going to happen, but
Yeah, yeah,
I think
yeah.
we're reaching the point where that identity is being lost. And it's like right now, if I were to just combine the teams, like I think that you're going to have still like a really big identity crisis. So it's an interesting challenge, and I think that like my goal has been to try and get the second team staffed up more appropriately. So I've been trying to advocate for that as much as I can. I feel like that's my responsibility to go to my leadership and say, hey, look, like we have to start saying no to things. Like we just don't have a choice because this is the side effect. And if they truly are that critical, like now you know that we can't accomplish them. So like we need to be investing into getting other resources to come on, or you're accepting that we cannot do the things. So that's mostly what I'm trying to do.
It's probably also important to be able to communicate like the impact of like sustaining this kind of state for a team. Like
Yeah.
sometimes like people at a higher level don't necessarily recognize what it might do to individuals on a team, and being able to communicate like, look, the other impact is like you're getting the highest priority work done, but people are going to start thinking about where else they can go because they're looking for that sense of team, perhaps, right? And that's like a real risk. And so you
Yeah.
can do this. It's the same as like it's the exact same for me as orgs that ask like heavy, intense effort from their teams. Like you can't be running all the time. And so the reality is if you try, you might get somewhere, but eventually you're going to start, the impacts are going to be too great, and you're going to really like lose it by either through losing individuals or through lost productivity, or whatever that takes the form of.
For sure. And I've even had my own manager ask me for support from my first team to say, hey, can I get more people to help with this? And I'm like, I have no problem with it if it's the highest priority. Like I personally, I default to that, and it's maybe not good because it comes at the expense of the identity. But my personal belief has been like, if we're truly like a cohesive unit, like going beyond just our immediate team, right? I manage a couple of what I would call feature crews inside of our bigger deployment team. And if we are truly a cohesive deployment team, I feel okay in focusing on the most important part. So I then have the responsibility to tell my manager, I said to her, if I do this, just so you know, we don't have capacity for, and I mentioned basically some core things that are routine that just literally will not have any capacity. And she said, I wasn't aware that something that important would not have attention. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, yeah, like we're at that point where, that would fall. And she was like, well, then no, we can't do that. So it wasn't like not a fight, no friction. She'd asked and I'm happy to provide. But again, it's like I was just providing transparency around these things are not going to have hands on them. So
For better or for worse, I think that skill, that not skill, that like that characteristic is something that probably those of us who have spent time in smaller startups are probably more amenable to, which is like, we'll do whatever's the most important because we have to. And
yeah,
I think that's really fostered for those that come up through kind of startup culture, and a sense of like, I don't even necessarily have a role that dictates that I do specific things. I do whatever the organization or the team needs to succeed. And it's possible that there are people who haven't had that experience to date and have worked in environments where they are asked by their organization to like have a very specific mandate and like stay true to that, and not think about like being able
yeah.
to step in and fill a wider need, right?
Yeah, and it's I'm trying to think about some takeaways here for myself, right? But the explicitly to that point, right? Like being in it, like I come from startups, start up like singular, and I think that exactly as you said, that's been fostered in me, and because I lean so heavily into like we'll just do the right thing, like one of the things I can and should be doing more of, I kind of touched on, is just being in a position to say no. And
Mm-hmm.
what I want to make sure that I start doing more of is saying no, but I don't want to say no because I see this happen a lot and it drives me nuts, just to be honest. I see emails go back and forth where teams are like, not us, not us, and everyone's putting their hands
Mm-hmm.
up being like, not us. And I'm like, look, it's all of us. Like you can't There's none of this not us thing. But
Corporate hot potato.
yeah, and it's drives me nuts, right? Like Microsoft is a huge company, so this happens a lot. But instead of saying not us, like I want to make sure I don't give into that, but I want to be able to say like we cannot because this is what we're giving up. So if someone who has more say in what's a higher priority deems otherwise, like happy to switch, but like just so you know, this is what we're balancing. That's why we're saying no. And I feel like saying no with context might afford other people. They might say, "Hey, look, can we bring in your manager or like your PM team and like can we talk about that?" I'm sure like I'm cool with that. I don't want to say no to make people feel crappy and be frustrated they can't get their stuff done, but I have my own, goals that have been laid out for me that I need to go accomplish. My team charter, even if it's feeling a little bit disjoint, the overall
Right.
team charter,
Hey,
right?
at least you have one.
But I think for me, that's a takeaway that like I need to be able to position myself to, um, say no more and provide context as I'm doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Saying no is tough for people who like think that we need to step in and do the right thing. And I think it's also sometimes tough for people who, I mean, I can speak for myself to say, having not been a leader for all that long, and my natural state is to be more of like a pleaser. It's my default position is like, let me be helpful. But the higher up you are as a leader and the more people kind of under your umbrella, the more people are affected by your inability to say no. Like you're now responsible for these people. And so it's not just like, well, I'm willing to put in extra work and step up and help or refocus because that's what's asked of me. But now like it's what's asked of many
Everyone.
others as a result of me. So you always have to be careful there for sure. I think another interesting point, and I've thought a lot about this as I thought through the pain points of my own team and what we could do about it. Something that I often forget is a totally viable technique is going to the team with the situation and listening empathetically to the impacts and then engaging them in the solution. And so instead of, hey, this sucks, but couple of you have to go work on this other initiative because it's important. Like, hey, there's been this initiative that's been brought to us that's important. Here's the risks of us like dedicating capacity to it, but here's why it's what's important. My thought was we might approach it this way, but like, what do you all think? And sometimes we might actually be surprised by the people who are going to be impacted by the decision and either their willingness to step up or a creative solution that might come from that group that we as leaders hadn't thought about.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that can work really well if you have a small enough group. I think I don't know what the magic number is or anything like that, but I can imagine with a bigger group, and this isn't specific to your scenario, but you start to get indecisiveness. You had a great phrase that you always say about like reducing chaos, right? Like bring clarity, reduce chaos. I'm probably butchering it a little bit. There's chaos in
I
there.
stole it from someone on Twitter, so
so it's okay if I butcher it. But
right.
I think that rings true there, where if you have a small enough team where you can do that, you can still manage the chaos if people are disagreeing. You start to have a good conversation about it. But if you have a really big team and you only have a couple of people speaking up and they're basically debating, it might be kind of chaotic. But I like the idea of getting the team to be feeding into like owning their some of the direction they're heading in, and it's good because you can observe and learn from them as well, not just kind of dictate because you've seen something work well before.
Well, for what it's worth, a shared former leader of ours who I respected always said that you should come into meetings to your team with a plan, and your best execution is when the team arrives at that conclusion on their own or feel like it was their own decision. So there's definitely times when debate and discussion will happen, but as we get stronger as leaders, we will find ways to like influence a direction instead of letting things remain in chaos. And ultimately the best would be if everyone comes to a conclusion that they're happy with. But I think even just that exercise of here's the problem, and before we decide on a solution, I want to hear what you all have to say about it, like please come to the table, carries a lot of weight for sure.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Well, I mean, as always, these types of conversations are super valuable. I learn every single time we talk through stuff. So I wanted to say thanks to you for, kind of sharing your experiences, the direction you're heading in. I think it's insightful. And I said earlier, like, I'm really excited to hear about how this transition goes over the next few times we meet up. I don't know how long it's going to take to get some tangible feedback, but it'll be cool to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, like, either it's going to be going well and I'll talk excitedly about it, or it's going to be going catastrophically and I'll be looking for help.
Well,
So
either way, there's going to be learning, so that'll be awesome.
that's right.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks, Graeme, for your time, and for those of you watching and listening, thank you for tuning in. Do us a favor, subscribe if you haven't already, like and share the video because it helps us. And of course, if you have topics and stuff you want to hear about, let us know, and we're happy to see if we can get that scheduled in. So thanks, and
Yeah,
we'll
we're
see you next
back.
time.
Lots more to talk about. That's
Yes.
it.
Yeah, it'll be an exciting time. Okay, take care.
All right.